focus on the economy. The numbers are in on the jobs report from the month of May. We have reaction from the White House. The church in Germany. New developments regarding one of the country's Catholic leaders. Somber anniversary. How students in Hong Kong are remembering the violence in Tiananmen Square. And Body and Blood of Christ, a preview of Sunday's feast day, one of the most important in the church calendar. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, June 4th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden reacts to the latest jobs report described as lukewarm, better than April's, but falling short of economists' forecast. Last month, U.S. employers added 559,000 jobs. The president said in a speech today, America is finally on the move again, but cautioned the nation will hit some bumps along the way. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, before we return to the White House this afternoon from Delaware, the president also said you can't reboot the world's largest economy like flipping on a light switch.
Jobs are up, wages are up, manufacturing is up, growth is up.
President Joe Biden addresses the latest jobs report from the Labor Department, which reveals that as the economy improves with more shots in arms, companies are still struggling to find enough workers.
There's going to be ups and downs in jobs and economic reports.
Some reasons for the challenge in finding employees: people looking for better jobs or retiring earlier, childcare issues, and the additional $300 in federal unemployment money, which is coming to an end.
It's going to expire in 90 days. That makes sense. It expires in 90 days. To sum it up, look, COVID cases are down.
Later, expanding on that in the press briefing room.
So I think the question is, do you think Americans, given 7 million are still out of work or more than that, could benefit from 8 more weeks or 10 more weeks of these $300 unemployment benefits? Our view is they can and they should.
Meanwhile, the White House is expanding a list of Chinese companies that U.S. investors can't go near. The reason? Purported links to the Chinese military and surveillance. It was originally ordered under President Donald Trump.
In an article in the Financial Review, Nina Shea, director of the Hudson Institute's Center for Religious Freedom, said it's an important sign of continuity with the Trump administration in the recognition that China now poses a new, serious threat to fundamental freedoms at home and abroad. But the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson warning that China will take necessary measures to resolutely safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese enterprises.
Also tonight, President Joe Biden will soon meet with Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Putin said today that relations between both nations are, quote, at an extremely low level now. Separately, Facebook is suspending the account of former President Donald Trump. President Trump said that's an insult, and he called it censoring and silencing. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Negotiations over President Biden's infrastructure plan have reached a critical phase with this week a new offer from the president. But is it enough for Senate Republicans to give the plan the green light? Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
Infrastructure negotiations continue at the White House between the president and Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. The president is changing the way to pay for this infrastructure proposal after Senate Republicans strongly opposed to raising the corporate income tax rate from 21% to 28%.
Patience is not unending, and he wants to make progress.
The president's latest offer, a 15% minimum tax on corporations, because many corporations don't even pay that much right now, according to government statistics. In fact, at least 55 of the nation's biggest companies paid no federal corporate income tax last year. The president also offered to slash his proposed infrastructure spending in half to around $1 trillion, similar to the latest offer from Republicans. But Republicans want to use unspent coronavirus relief money to pay for the new infrastructure, which the White House has rejected.
Hoping for the best that we can actually reach a bipartisan agreement on infrastructure.
If there are no major breakthroughs this week, several Democrats are urging the White House to move on, and the president's top aides are warning the window for talks is closing.
The bottom line is, one way or another, we have to do it. We have to deliver. We We have a chance right now to rebuild America.
Democrats could try to pass a measure without Republican support through a process called reconciliation, a simple majority vote, which circumvents Senate rules that require 60 votes to pass most legislation. But the approach is uncertain after at least 2 Senate Democrats have raised concerns. Plus, the Senate parliamentarian ruled after Democrats used reconciliation to get the $1.9 trillion coronavirus stimulus bill passed earlier this year, they can only use reconciliation one more time in 2021. Democratic aides tell me that that's why this latest infrastructure package needs to be even bigger, because Democrats have only one more chance to go at it alone before the 2022 election on any major legislation. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, the Archdiocese of Milwaukee says its records on clergy abuse cases were sealed as part of its 2012 federal bankruptcy case. For this reason, the Archdiocese says it will not comply with the Wisconsin Attorney General's request for the documentation. A leading German cardinal offers his resignation to Pope Francis. Cardinal Reinhard Marx, Archbishop of Munich and Freising, resigned over the mishandling of clergy sexual abuse cases. He is a member of the Pope's Council of Cardinals, the coordinator of the Vatican Council for the Economy, and until last year, the chairman of the German Bishops' Conference. Martin Rothweiler, director of EWTN Germany, joins us now from Rome. Thank you so much for your time today. Tell us, what did Cardinal Marx's resignation letter say, and has the Holy Father accepted the resignation?
Pope Francis has not accepted the resignation of Cardinal Marx yet. In the Cardinal's personal letter to Pope Francis, he explained that, in essence, it is about sharing responsibility for the catastrophe of sexual abuse by church officials over the past decades. There was a great deal of personal failure and administrative error, but also institutional or systemic failure. Cardinal Marx wrote that recent discussions have shown that some in the church do not want to acknowledge precisely this element of shared responsibility, and thus also share guilt on the part of the institution, and are therefore hostile to any dialogue on reform and renewal in connection with the abuse crisis. He added, "I believe that one way of expressing this readiness for responsibility is my resignation from office in this way. I can perhaps set a personal sign for new beginnings, for a new departure of the Church, not only in Germany." According to Cardinal Marx, the turning point out of this crisis can only be a synodal way, a way that truly enables the discernment of spirits.
And Martin, I'd like to switch gears a little bit here. Earlier this month, Pope Francis published an apostolic letter introducing the lay ministry of catechists. Can you tell us more about that, and what is the situation in Germany regarding this letter?
The catechesis is clearly in a crisis in Germany. The knowledge and teaching about the faith of the Church is very low. A solid catechesis has not happened over decades. This obviously has its negative effect on the quality of the debates in the so-called synodal path.
And today in Rome, I understand there is a German conference on the challenges of catechesis. Tell us more about this conference.
The conference is an answer of this crisis I mentioned before. It provides an analysis of the present situation and stresses the urgent necessity of the catechesis with regard to the evangelization. The essential message is that catechesis is about who is Jesus Christ and who is the Church. In order to love Jesus and his Church, I need to know him. And the conference is transmitted live by EWTN, so it will reach many more people.
And does this conference have any connection to the synodal path that you mentioned earlier?
Well, some of the questions that are in debate on the synodal path are the permission of Protestants to receive the Holy Communion or the ordination of women. The answer to these questions require a formation in line with the Church teachings, and many Catholics in Germany have not been taught the faith thoroughly, so a sound and attractive catechesis is an important precondition for a fruitful evangelization.
Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for talking to us about this. Martin Rothweiler, Director of EWTN Germany. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
An elderly Nigerian priest is receiving medical care following his release by abductors. Armed bandits attacked a parish in the Diocese of Sokoko on May 20th. They killed 33-year-old Father Alphonsus Bello and held 75-year-old Father Joe Kiki for ransom. There are now prayers for the conversion of the attackers. A deadly attack in Baghdad last night killed 3 people and injured 16. The explosion took place at a crowded restaurant near a shrine revered by Shiite Muslims. Our students in Hong Kong remember the Tiananmen Square pro-democracy protests. They stood silently before a statue called the Pillar of Shame. It portrays the unknown number slain when armed troops fired on student protesters in Beijing back in 1989. Thousands have gathered in past years, but China is policing these memorials. Several Catholic parishes in Hong Kong are offering memorial masses. Coming up, some religious hospitals are being accused of discrimination. We have reaction. A People's Tribunal in London hears testimony about Chinese treatment of Uyghur prisoners in so-called vocation camps.
They didn't treat the male prisoners as human beings.
Chaired by a former prosecutor for the International Criminal Court, the tribunal wants to show evidence of alleged re-education camp abuses by China against minority Muslim Uyghurs. Beijing flatly rejects the claims. The Biden administration recently announced that it would reverse policies that protected the conscious rights of religious hospitals. A university professor says doing so is a big mistake. In a commentary piece for the National Catholic Register, Professor Richard Garnett writes in part, quote, "The Sierra Club should not be required to support drilling for oil in a national park, and a Catholic hospital should not be expected, let alone required, to provide or participate in elective abortions, euthanasia, or sex reassignment procedures." And joining us now is Richard Garnett, professor of law at the University of Notre Dame. Professor Garnett, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Could you talk to us more about some of the efforts to force religious hospitals to violate their character, mission, or foundation?
Yeah, sure. These are troubling developments because, as you know, hospitals really began as religious ministries, and across the country, there are countless social service agencies and schools and hospitals and hospice care places that are animated by a religious mission. And one of the things that that mission means is that it's supposed to animate the entire way that they provide care and provide services. And what we're seeing now from several governments, not just the federal administration, is an effort to require these faith-based social service agencies, including Catholic ones, in the name of anti-discrimination law, to provide particular procedures or services that we regard as immoral. So again, a Catholic hospital being required to provide an abortion, as I suggested in that op-ed piece, is kind of like asking the Sierra Club to support damming a river. And the troubling thing is it's a misuse of the term discrimination, because I think as Americans, we're committed to the rule of law and we believe in equal protection of the laws. And so we tend to be worried about discrimination. But these hospitals and these social service agencies are not discriminating. Instead, they have core commitments that preclude them from participating in certain wrongful actions, such as an elective abortion. It's not discrimination, it's integrity.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Biden administration's attempts to reverse conscious protections. Can you talk about what's currently in place right now, the protections that are in place, and what, if anything, is being done to save or preserve them?
Sure. So there's actually been, for decades now, there had been something of a consensus that even if there was a legal right to abortion, that Catholic healthcare providers would not be required, and indeed the taxpayers would not be required, to participate in or support these procedures. But there's been a lot of pressure on that from various quarters, both at the state level and now from the Biden administration. And so what's being proposed in various of the administration's departments are interpretations of federal law that would interpret anti-discrimination law to require these hospitals to provide things like gender reassignment surgery or abortion, even though that violates their conscience rights. Now, again, there have been conscience protections in place for faith-based healthcare providers for a long time, but I think these are now more in play and indeed more at risk. You asked what's being done to protect them. Well, I mean, I think we can count on religious liberty advocates and litigators to hold the administration and to hold state governments to account on this front. And we'll have to hope that the courts will come to the conclusion that any effort to make a Catholic hospital perform an abortion is a violation of religious freedom protections.
Yeah, we don't have a whole lot of time left, maybe about a minute or so. But I'm curious, do you think this is an issue that goes beyond hospitals? And do you think religious schools or colleges could be affected by this?
Yeah, for sure. This cuts across the board. So imagine a university that has a policy of housing men and women in separate dormitories. Under current interpretations that are being proposed, these universities would have to allow permit people to reside in the dorm of their choice in terms of their gender identity or their professed gender identity. You could imagine schools that refuse to cover abortion in their student insurance plans being required to cover insurance in their insurance plans. So it's not just hospitals, it's any faith-based non-governmental agency is at risk if we misunderstand discrimination as including acting out on one's basic religious commitments.
Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it right there. Thank you so much for your time today. We really do appreciate it. Richard Garnett, Professor of Law at the University of Notre Dame. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Our Catholic Charities USA is thanking former President George W. Bush for a special donation. The 43rd president has a new book out of many, one Portraits of America's Immigrants. Several stories credited Catholic Charities USA for their support. In recognition, Mr. Bush is contributing $100,000 from the book's proceeds. Up next, celebrating the body and blood of Christ. We'll take you to Corpus Christi celebrations in Mexico. Plus, theologian and author Dr. Edward Sri joins us to talk more about the Catholic solemnity. This weekend's beatification of an Italian nun coincides with the Feast of Corpus Christi. Tonight's Eucharistic adoration anticipates Sunday's beatification of Sister Maria Laura Mainetti. She lived and ministered near Lake Como in the Lombardy region, serving troubled youth. In 2000, she was killed by 3 teen girls who had been her students. Pope Francis calls Sister Mainetti a martyr of the faith. To read more about Sister's inspiring story, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. The faithful in Mexico celebrated the Feast of Corpus Christi yesterday, and after Mass, there was a special treat for children. Cardinal Carlos Aguilera Reyes and other church leaders handed out gifts to children after Mass. Many of the youngsters dressed in traditional clothes in honor of Juan Diego, to whom Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared in the year 1531. For most dioceses in the United States, the Feast of Corpus Christi will be celebrated this weekend. And joining us now to tell us more about the Feast of Corpus Christi is Dr. Edward Sri, theologian and author of the 10th anniversary edition of A Biblical Walk Through the Mass from Ascension Press. Dr. Sri, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Can you talk to us more about the feast? What are its origins and why it's so important?
I think we need Corpus Christi this year more than ever before, not just because of the lockdowns and so many people being away from the Eucharist, but even more because of these recent studies many are familiar with showing that so many Catholics, like over 60% of Catholics, don't believe in the real presence of the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus in the Eucharist. And that's a crisis of faith. We need to pray for an outpouring of Eucharistic faith and Eucharistic love. And so this year's Corpus Christi, I think, is so important for us. It goes all the way back to the the idea of people having some doubts about the Eucharist, actually, way back in the 13th century. The year was 1263 AD. And there was a German priest that had heard from some theologians that were raising doubts about the real presence, and he himself had his faith a little shaken. He was wondering, and he was on pilgrimage to Rome. He gets close to Rome to a small little village known as Bolsena, and he's offering the Mass, and as he's holding up the consecrated host, suddenly the host begins dripping blood. And he saw that this was a sign, a Eucharistic miracle. It was the blood of Christ. And he went and told the Pope about it, and the Pope eventually instituted this great feast of Corpus Christi to really celebrate the gift, one of the greatest gifts that Jesus gives us, his very body and blood in the Eucharist.
You know, and you mentioned that a lot of people not believing that the Eucharist is actually the body and blood of Christ. And a recent poll came out saying that. Why do you think that is? You know, and why is there this disconnect? Where is it coming from? And what can be done?
A couple things. First, we live in a secular world that doesn't believe in things that you can't see. But we know as Christians that it's the invisible world that is the most important, right? Right now, there's angels all around us, the Holy Spirit dwelling within us. That's what really matters. So it's hard for them to wrap their mind around Eucharistic faith. But I don't think the problem is simply out there. I think the challenge, the real challenge, is more within the church, is that there are many within the church who've kind of taken on some of this secular mindset. And we've had really bad catechesis on the Eucharist, sadly. That where the faith isn't being passed on to the next generation. It's not being preached as boldly as it can be from the pulpit. People aren't given an encounter with Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. But I will say this, for my years of doing so much ministry, especially with young people, when they come to hear about the real presence, and they have a real encounter with Jesus in the tabernacle, in communion, or in Eucharistic adoration, it's life-changing. I know in the Focus Conference we do every year, you'll see when they bring the monstrance in to this big hall of like 18,000 young people, they all fall on their knees to worship Jesus. It's very moving. We just have to proclaim the truth with great joy and in great clarity so that people can come believe this great reality.
Absolutely. And, you know, we mentioned before the Feast of Corpus Christi was celebrated on Thursday in Mexico. However, most of us will celebrate it this weekend. Can you tell us, you know, why is there that differences and observances? What's the reason behind it?
You know, it's kind of like, I don't know if you remember this. I remember as a kid, Holy Thursday or Ascension Thursday was celebrated on Ascension Thursday. It was a Thursday. And then I remember, I think I was like in college when the U.S. bishops decided to move it to a Sunday to kind of remove like an extra holy day of obligation. So we still celebrate the Ascension, but we're not doing it in the middle of the week where we have a holy day of obligation. And so that's, you know, that I understand there's some countries, I know Italy does the same thing. That's what happened with the Feast of Corpus Christi as well. You know, it was originally on a Thursday, and it'd be the Thursday after Holy Trinity Sunday. And Thursday makes sense because on what day did Jesus give us the gift of his body and blood? It was on Holy Thursday. So it makes sense that we would have a feast celebrating the Eucharist, remembering that day of Thursday. But I know, again, many places around the world have moved it to Sunday. But I know I just got emails from people who've listened to my podcast when I was talking about this, people from Croatia and other places say, no, we still celebrate it on Thursday. And you're like in Mexico and other places. So that origin connects it to Holy Thursday when Jesus instituted the Eucharist. But we still celebrate it. And even here in the United States, we have it. It's going to be just on Sunday for us here.
Well, Dr. Sri, thank you so much for your time today and talking with us. We really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. God bless.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We leave you tonight with another Corpus Christi procession, this one from the Archdiocese of Poznan in Poland. Good night and God bless.